Hey y'all, it's St. Pam again. Today, I'm going to be talking about the names of the male Warframes. If you saw the video I did on the female frames, then you know what to expect. Now, the images I'm going to use are from my husband's account. He currently has all of the male frames, while I only have a few of them. We'll do this in alphabetical order, as I did previously. So let's get started. First up, we have Ash. Interestingly, this was not his original name. His initial name started simply as Ninja, and the smoke before they settled on Ash. Now, it seems he was named this only because ninjas disappear in a plume of smoke, and smoke and ash go together. It doesn't hurt that the frame emits smoke from his arm, and he disappears. All of his abilities reflect his stature as a space ninja. He throws shurikens at his enemies, he has smoke bombs to stun his foes, and it doesn't hurt that it makes it hard for them to see. He can teleport into melee range of his enemies. He also has the ability to create shadowy clones that attack enemies he has marked. So yeah, I think his abilities fit his name pretty well. Next up, we have Atlas. This name finds its origin in Greek mythology, from the name of the titan that holds up the sky. It is also used for carvings of men that support buildings in Greek architecture. This name works well as this frame's abilities involve a lot of rocks. This guy can slide into his enemies like a landslide and punch them in the face with as much force. He has the ability to create a wall of stone, which he can send flying towards his foes if he chooses. Like Medusa from Greek mythology, his gaze can turn his enemies into stone. Atlas also has the ability to create stone golems, or rumblers, to fight by his side. This only scratches the surface, but it's clear that he fits the name. Do you like dragons? I certainly do, and this next frame is made to look like one. Chroma itself means the purity of color, and again, this particular frame delivers. The color of his energy has an effect on the type of damage his abilities cause. Red, magenta, brown, orange, and bright yellow cause heat damage. Blue and purple cause electrical damage. Green, lime, teal, and dark yellow are toxic. White, gray, black, and some faded colors are cold damage. Not only does that fit his name, but also works for dragons in general, as different types tend to be different colors. Aside from that, he can blast his enemies with a breath of elemental energies. He creates a ward that enemies are injured within and that defends allies. If his shields are hit, his armor increases. Damage to his health also increases the amount of damage his weapons cause. On top of that, he can remove his dragon-like pelt and make it stand as a sentry, which strengthens allies or attacks foes. Anyone familiar with the tales of King Arthur and Merlin will recognize the name of that king's famous sword, Excalibur. Appropriately, for a frame named after a sword, he is primarily a swordsman. He gets 10% attack speed and damage when using single swords, dual swords, nakanas, and rapiers. Nimble and quick, he dashes between his foes and slashes at them with his exalted blade. The exalted blade is a powerful weapon that is made of pure light that he's able to use for a short time for a couple of abilities. He is also able to blind his enemies, as he is able to emit a bright flash of light. and he has the ability to throw javelins at his foes, which pin them to the wall. So I think his abilities fit the knight theme and the swordsman theme pretty well. Frost is a frame with an obvious name. Frost is the layer of ice crystals that covers a surface. All of his abilities are based around the cold. He can freeze his enemies in place. Sharp crystals of ice can be sent in a wave towards his foes. Thanks to his abilities, moisture in the air around him can be gathered and formed into a snow globe around himself, which slows enemies and that are already within it, but it also prevents them from being able to shoot you from outside of it. He is also able to create an avalanche that will freeze and shatter those in his path. If you like spoopy things, then Harrow may be for you. One of the meanings of this word, and the only one that seems to fit, is to cause distress to, or to disturb keenly or painfully. This name fits well for his story at the very least. However, I'm not going to spoil anything from his quest here. More than the quest for his main blueprint, I think he fits the Dark Priest fill. He can chain his enemies in place to reinforce his shield, which is a trick that makes me think of Invader Zim. By sacrificing his own shields, he can help improve his ability with firearms, as well as turn damage to enemies into health for himself and his allies. By channeling his own energy into his thurible, Harrow is able to create a buff for himself that will convert the enemies he kills into energy for the squad. The best way to protect your allies is invincible, and Harrow can definitely deliver on that one. For those of you that like pirates, but weren't sure how they would fit into this game, fear not. DE has you covered. Hydroid is a fairly interesting name for this frame as it refers to a stage in the life of one of the relatives in the jellyfish family. Hydro also refers to water, so that's pretty fitting. His abilities allow him to call a watery orbital strike on a targeted location. He is also able to transform into a wall of water and crash into his enemies. That isn't the only transformation trick up his sleeves. He can also turn into a deep pool of water to trap unsuspecting foes. If you thought the Kraken wasn't going to be involved, then you were wrong. At least, I'm going to call this monstrosity that rises with a swarm of tentacles a Kraken. One of the most interesting Male frames, at least in my opinion, is Inaros. The source of his name is Inaros of Athribis. He was an Egyptian prince who rebelled against the Assyrians while they occupied Egypt. This ties in extremely well with the quest to obtain this Warframe, but I'm not spoiling anything for you here either. His appearance and abilities fit the Egyptian theme very well too. So he can blind his enemies with a pocket of sand or by kicking sand at them, which also allows you to steal their health. He has the ability to capture foes in quicksand in order to eat them. Inaros can turn into a sandstorm that sends his targets flying away. If you need to be harder to kill, then you can take your health to create armor. Did you ever want to be a magician? Well, that's great, because you can do that with limbo. So the word itself refers to a place that exists between life and death. Such a fitting name for a frame that creates a rift to another realm. He has the ability to banish enemies to whatever plane of existence that he isn't in. Any enemies that are bound in his rift can be frozen in place, While in his rift, he can surge them with rift energy that can transfer outside to other enemies, or that will banish their fellows into the rift if they leave it. Lastly, he can create a bubble that links his reality with the material worlds. Allies can pass in and out of this bubble at will. Enemies that enter the bubble are unable to interact with items in the material world. You know what? He's not a magician. He's a Time Lord. So, we have Loki now. He gets his name from the Norse god of mischief and fire. He is also a notorious trickster. Like so many of these frames, his name is pretty much perfect. He has the ability to create a decoy that will draw enemy fire while he turns invisible. He can play tricks on friend and foe alike by switching places with them. If he wants, he can combine all of these to really cause confusion and disarm all of his enemies. So it seems that he can sow the seeds of chaos well. Necros fills the niche of Necromancer for those that like to play with the dead. His name is Greek for dead, so there you go. He punches the souls from his enemies, which will then injure those in its path. Enemies can be filled with terror that causes them to flee. By desecrating falling enemies, he can find additional resources on them. As his name would suggest, he also has the ability to raise these fallen foes, who may have just been desecrated, to make them fight for him. So he has absolutely no respect for the dead at all. Neja is a Taoist, I think I said that correctly, deity, who was killed and then brought back to life by his teacher. This teacher created a new body for Neja with lotus roots and gave him two weapons: Windfire wills, and the fire-tipped spear. Usual depictions of him include the universe ring. All of this fits the fancy frame well. He is able to leave a trail of flames in his wake that hurts his enemies and cleanses his allies. Throwing a ring of fire burns his foes and causes them to heal his allies on death. A ring that stuns enemies and protects him can be summoned around him. Neja can also cause fiery spears to burst from the ground and impel the enemies. So all of that seems to fit his story and appearance well. The infested frame is named after the focus of infection, Nidus. As is appropriate for his name, he is the focus from which infestation can spread. He can cause a fungus that will damage and steal energy from enemies to break through the ground. Enemies can be snatched up and possibly eaten by tentacles that he summons. Nidus can also create a parasitic link between ally or enemy. The effect on allies is to increase their ability strength. On enemies, it forces them to take damage done to him. He also has the ability to call a swarm of maggots to feast on his enemies. Yummy. Like Titania, Oberon gets his name from A Midsummer Night's Dream. He is the king of the fairies, and his looks and abilities fit. When focusing energy at a target, he injures it and surrounding enemies. He can cause grass to grow before him, which inflicts damage upon the enemies that stand in it, as well as protects allies. He's kind of like a grandfather that doesn't want strange kids on his lawn. Not only can he protect his allies, he can also heal them. If he finds himself surrounded, he can focus his energy to lift his foes up and then slam them back into the ground. Much like his namesake, Rhino is big and strong. He charges towards his enemy, striking at any in his path. He also has the ability to harden his skin, making it harder for anything to hurt him. His large size allows him to stomp so hard that he disrupts time and sends foes into stasis. He also has a roar that bolsters his allies to cause more damage. Signor de Voebond was the top engineer in the military during the late 1600s. It is appropriate that a frame that makes great use of technology would have his name. He has a grenade that zaps passing enemies. He has a number of traps he can lay. One will bounce friend or foe around. So if you have a bunch of Voebonds in a group, you could create a bouncy castle. Another creates a trip line that does what you would expect. He can place a proximity mine that blows up when they get near it. Lastly, he can lay a mine that will stun enemies and deafen them for a while. He can also create a field that suspends foes in stasis, which is really handy when you are trying to defend something. A vortex can be created when you have a need to crush your enemies into tiny particles. Volt has a name that is fairly obvious. It comes from the SI unit of electromotive force. Since he uses electricity, it's a fitting name. He can shock his enemies, which can stun them and spread to others. By energizing his body, he and his allies can run at incredible speeds. He can create an electrical shield that protects those that stand behind it and empowers projectiles sent through it. By discharging built-up energy, Volt can create a massive electrical charge that paralyzes and shocks surrounding foes. Sun Wukong, or the Monkey King, is a legendary figure from the Song Dynasty. As with Ne Zha, the frame fits the inspiration. He was very strong and fast. He was also a skilled warrior, knows how to transform himself, and carries a very heavy staff. His jab can expand his staff to its full length, which knocks down foes in its path. When he is on the verge of death, he can focus his energy to boost his health. He can evaporate into a cloud and float through the fight unimpeded. His staff can be summoned for more than a jab and wielded with deadly force. So those are the Male Frames available currently. I think DE has done very well finding unusual names, or names that are based in legend, and making the abilities and appearance fit. I can't wait to see what they add in the future. That's pretty much all I have for now, though, so thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a great night. If you like what I've done here, then please consider liking and subscribing. Anyway, have a great night. Bye!